Well, thank you. Our last session is going to focus on trying to bring from our discussion a set of recommendations that could actually move the policy process forward in the U.S. relationship with the Middle East. I think we've come a long way in our understanding of the Middle East. There's a story about Ralph Bunche, who worked with the United Nations and won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work in the Arab-Israeli, the Palestinian conflict, the initial one in 1948. And one of his famous quotes is, I hope to get the Arab and Israelis to sit down in true Christian spirit to resolve their differences. And I think we've moved beyond that kind of level of understanding of the Middle East. Our goal today, as I said, is to try to come up with a set of conclusions. And as a dean, one of the things I typically do is write my own minutes from my meetings so that I get to define the conclusions of what we actually decided. Unfortunately, today I don't have that prerogative, so I really hope that we make this a group effort and try to define what the outcomes will be for today. The person who will be leading us is sitting here at my right. He's Dr. Stephen Galatas. Just a few words of introduction. Dr. Galatas got his MA from Vanderbilt University, and his PhD, it says here, from the University of Missouri. He has has publications in the Journal of Politics, Public Choice, PS, which is Political Science and Politics, and Political Science and Policy Journal. He has a forthcoming chapter actually coming out in the book from last year's event on the transatlantic relationship and on redefining the transatlantic relationship. And his teaching and research interests are on political parties and elections, and focuses, as I do, primarily on the European Union. So our other panelists we've already met is Dr. Ursula Muenzel and Dr. Mike Tkacik. And what Dr. Galatas will do is lead us through our discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. I also teach the Middle East politics class in the Department of Government at SFA, so I do spend a little time at least teaching on this region of the world. Before I get started, let me express my thanks to Ursula and University of St. Thomas as well for helping this year, and it's been a great conference again this year. I hope this is a harbinger 2 years in a row of great things coming in the future as well. Dr. Murphy, again, thanks to you and to Ms. Grohl-Dixie for putting this together, and also support from Heather Catton and the Office of International Programs at SFA. Thanks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pose some broad themes. I've got 6 of these, and we'll sort of break it down and give our panelists time to address these. So the first theme, and these are in no particular order, is the Middle East different? Or in other words, should the U.S. treat this region differently than it treats other regions? And this gets into questions of, do we accept a degree of statism in the economy in this region? We've batted around concepts like representative government and democracy. Do we accept a standard definition of democracy in this region? And if so, how does that differ from our acceptance of, for example, social democracy in Europe? And why should we accept a very social democratic regime in Iceland as an okay ally and not accept a stronger degree of statism in the Middle East? Second thing, is U.S. policy toward this region driven by a realist, a neo-realist, or a pragmatic approach to politics and foreign policy? Thirdly, what do we want to foster? We've talked about fostering democracy or not fostering democracy, fostering markets, not fostering markets, and several people have hinted about the idea of good governance. And that means not only governance in the sense of the political system, but also, from our last panel, good governance in the economic realm as well. Thirdly, what are the limitations on U.S. policy that are driven by internal U.S. politics? And that's something we haven't really spent a lot of time addressing at this conference, but I think it's a critical issue too. What are the internal limits within the U.S.? And I think lastly, should U.S. policy stress the commonality of concern? And this is again coming out of a couple of the sessions, but I was struck throughout this by questions of concern over our children, the future, jobs, infrastructure. So why don't we start with the first question of, is the Middle East different and should we treat it differently? And why don't I just start with Dr. Murphy?
Well, thank you. All I'm going to try to do is draw upon the information provided by our speakers and try not to inject a personal dimension into this. Is the Middle East different? I think one of the things that came across to me very, very strongly is that there is no single approach that will work in the Middle East because of the cultural differences. And the first thing that we have to do is to respect the individual cultures of the countries that we're dealing with. Questions of honor and dignity and so forth came forward very formidably throughout our discussions. And that, I think, informs how not only the United States but the rest of the world should be interacting with the Middle East. That is, there's no cookie-cutter approach. And so is the Middle East different? I would say yes, in many, many ways.
Yes, I hope this is the outcome of this conference, that we all agree. And I said, is it different? Different from other regions? Regions, definitely, but is it also different or diverse in itself? And I hope this is all what we learned, that it is. And sometimes being part of the diplomatic, how I call it, circles from Germany, I sometimes was amazed. There is a very in-depth knowledge by American diplomats of the region, of the differences, but sometimes it isn't conveyed to consistent policy. You know, I don't know. I don't want to step on someone's toes, but to understand that nothing is monolithic, and not even the EU is very monolithic, as we all know. So definitely, it's different, and different from different region, and every country has a different history and faces different problems. So we or the US. So I got the green card, so I tend to say we should it definitely take the differences into consideration. That's all about. I hope this is the outcome and the common ground of this conference, that we agree on this.
I would take as evidence of this difference the need that my panel stressed for a small footprint. The United States creates many of its own problems, it would seem, with this very large and aggressive footprint. Now, maybe the case is we need a smaller footprint everywhere in the world. I don't know about that, but certainly the backlash or blowback in the Middle East has been intense, and to me this indicates that the region is different than other places that we're perhaps more comfortable in.
Okay, just a brief follow-up to that one, can each of you name one factor that makes the Middle East different in terms of U.S. policy? You can isolate sort of one factor for me, why we need a different policy in the Middle East as opposed to other parts of the world.
You want to start with me?
Yeah, if you want to, go ahead, Mike. If you've got an answer ready, go ahead.
I mean, that's actually, how do I say, self-answering question. I mean, each region is so different. So, I mean, you can't even, Africa is not a monolithic entity. Europe isn't. And I think this is a problem that maybe from a little bit of an isolationist standpoint, or it's the end of the conference, it looks similar to different parts of the world, but I mean, it's self-evident. I think the answer that it should be treated. But no, I don't. The question is, we should change the U.S. policy should be different.
What I'm asking here is if you can identify sort of one factor that makes this region different for the U.S. policy. I mean, for example, let me. I don't want to sort of bait the question, but does it matter that this is a major oil-producing region? Is it oil that makes it different? What is it that makes it different?
It's a different culture. Okay. It's a different set of values. That's the difference, and Europe is different. And I mean, I'm a cross-cultural trainer, so I was a little bit flabbergasted because I see that the world is different. Right. And we just should, I think it would be a better place just to acknowledge, not to be judgmental. This is what I taught my daughter, raising her on different continents. Don't be judgmental. Sometimes it's hard, I have to swallow, I don't accept it, but don't be judgmental and understand that the world ticks differently in different parts of the world.
Okay, and Mike, go ahead.
I think one of the differences is in definitions of democracy. When you, as a number of our speakers mentioned, there are a lot of polls. Yes, the Muslim world is very supportive of democracy, but when we dig deeper and we see a very offensive film that leads to violence in the streets, we realize that perhaps the value on dignity is somewhat more important than the value of freedom of speech. I think when we dig under democracy, we've got some differences there, not differences that are insurmountable, but differences that need to be recognized and discussed, negotiated, move toward some conclusions.
And to me, one thing is it's a region of extremes, extreme wealth, extreme poverty. I don't find consistently that level of dichotomy in many other regions of the world.
I think part of my motivation for the question is I think we have to be clear we're defining what we mean by some of these terms, and so in bringing the question forward, I'm trying to get clarification on why do we say the Middle East is different, and sometimes it may be self-evident, but it's better that we go ahead and articulate that. So, okay, let's take what was my third question, and then so what is U.S. policy really trying to foster in this region? What should be our goals post-Arab Spring in the region?
Okay, I think we should go ahead and focus on good governance and participation of the people, that they feel they are in charge of their lives, not so much on the formal one man, one vote, or one person, one vote, and just to give the people, I think one of the reasons of the Arab Spring is that people feel not in charge of their lives. And you can call this, they want to be represented, yes, in one way or the other. Maybe also we should look at the local traditions. It was always a kind of democracy in all the societies. Were it the elders, okay, they left the women out, but there was always a check and balance in the traditional societies, and maybe we should go back to these roots and include it in a new model. I don't want to draw the parallel, but I lived in Africa, and I asked my students, I said, we have to find our own model. We just can't adopt we can learn, and I think no one has to invent the wheel also when it comes to representation. We can definitely, they can definitely look at the West, but they have to find their own way and to reconcile their traditions with our ideas of representation, but to come up with something new. I mean, why limit the fantasy of also history, and to come up with a system of representation which represents their values, and not necessarily to impose it's like one size fits it all. It doesn't. So, yeah, that's my recommendation.
Again, I think my panelists were hit a number of times on the fact that there are limits on what the United States can do, and indeed there's blowback when we try to do too much. However, free markets seem to demand the sorts of institutions that liberty demands. Free markets provide training in the sorts of compromise that one needs in a system of good governance. it's not to say free markets lead immediately to liberal democracy, but it's to say that they create a friendly environment for liberal democracy. So I think the things that we can do to build the sort of civil society that encourages free markets, and where possible to help things like reducing corruption and enforcing contracts. I think those things are important. Now, it's a long project. It's not a project that yields democracy in 4 years, and unfortunately our political system demands results in 4 years or less. But I think that would be where I would put my money if I had any money to put.
Thank you. I will echo what they said, but with a slight twist. The role of the U.S. government, I agree. I think everyone here seems to agree that the role of the U.S. government should be limited in trying to produce any change, as one of our speakers said, because these are problems we cannot fix. We should eschew military power because it doesn't bring the results that will be long-lasting. We have to be sensitive to the local culture. I think what we need to do is, again, borrowing from our speakers, we should focus on trying to help people to achieve dignity. And the projects that we start, again, echoing one of our speakers, should be tied to indicators of good governance on the part of it. Again, working at the local level, eschewing the national level where we cannot make significant dents. And so the role of the U.S., I think, should be confined to what we can do, not to what we can't do. And regime change is something that we haven't had that great of success on.
Let's move on to what are the potential limitations that the U.S. faces as it engages this region as it emerges from the Arab Spring.
I don't have to go.
All right. I think we just have to keep building on the edifice that we're beginning to construct here. Democracy is going to be a very slow process. It's going to change and vary country by country. The term that you came up with, Steve, is good governance. I think we should be looking first at good governance. Democracy is going to have to evolve at a pace that respects national cultures. What we have to ingrain, and what the U.S. role could be, is trying to respect the dignity of individuals, and democracy will flow from that. And it's just changing the way that we interact with the countries.
Yeah, and work more. I mean, this is what I learned when I came to this country, the grassroots movement. So maybe work more with the grassroots movements there, and they might be not so significant, but I think this is also how democracy was taught to Germany after World War II. It was on the municipal level, and then the state level, and finally the nation came. So maybe we should also give the people more power of participation in the things that really matter to them, in the neighborhood, maybe then in the city, and go from there, and not impose it from above. So this is actually should come naturally to American policy, because this is how your country was built, opposed to European states. So
I thought our panelists gave us, I thought maybe the strongest part of the conference was the comments on the Arab Spring. And I walk away with many more ideas in my head, but I'm not sure I know anything more about the Arab Spring than when I walked in the doors. A few things that are floating around, something that you heard early, not in this conference, you heard at this conference, but way back near the beginning of the Arab Spring itself, that this is a defeat for extremists, because this is an example of democracy being created, and the extremists don't want democracy. Another thing that I think we heard a little bit of, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but the notion of Arab soft power, and the notion of soft power coming out of these states who have undergone the Arab Spring. I think that I'm not sure what to do with that, but I think that's something that's out there and that's going to have an impact on policy decisions as we move forward. Finally, well, two other short points. What is the impact of the Arab Spring on institutions and institution building? I think that's an interesting and important question. And then just a comment, and one that will echo, I think, what's been said a couple of times, that there's a short-term and long-term element here. The long-term element is the important one, but the short-term element is often the one that has more impact on U.S. decision-making.
Okay, if I may be so bold as to interject something at this point. We have the experience of doing this, and I appreciate Ursula's comments on this, because if you look at the Federal Republic of Germany, the states that now make up the federal system were based on U.S. decisions working in the local communities to resurrect part of the upper house of the Prussian, the Imperial German, but also using names and rhetoric. In Japan, the reason Japan has a two-house national legislature was not in the MacArthur Constitution originally, and we listened to the Japanese. So let me take that as a dovetail into this. What does the U.S. need to do to improve its ability to listen to this region of the world and to then respond to grassroots, Arab soft power, these other ideas, good governance ideas that have come up?
Listen to the experts, listen to your diplomats who are there on the ground, and we have had a lot of expertise, and I think this is just to listen more to the people who are there and translate it into an official policy, foreign policy. I think that this is very often what stuns me, no matter where we met, also your colleagues throughout the world, they were very, very knowledgeable, and I wouldn't say they knew the right answers, but they knew appropriate answers. But then you had very often the official doctrine, which was contrary to what the people on the ground said. So I think use the expertise which is around. Yeah.
And I think part of it is trying to remove politics as much as possible. I think listening to some of the presidential debates has been very, very discouraging. We're trying to make positive differences, and yet they're laced in ideology. The hallmark of American foreign policy traditionally has been its nonpartisanship, and we've lapsed into an era of partisanship. And that is not going to enable us to solve problems, to address problems, and to be solution makers when we're dealing out of ideology rather than out of what's right.
Michael Ryan on our panel spoke of the need for greater knowledge on our end, and I think that's spot on. We need to improve our own education system, revive area studies, cultural exchanges, as was spoken of by the consulars. I think there are a lot of ways we can work to improve not just the lack of listening, but the lack of awareness.
And to echo what Michael was saying, I just thought, one of the terms I think it was the Consul General of Egypt used is to build people-to-people ties. That is a very common, my area is actually Europe, and that was one of the things that the European Union and the United States did is build people-to-people initiatives, which are educational exchanges, business exchanges, and the government can be the facilitator, but not the driver of it.
So you're suggesting that the U.S. also has experience in this area in its own past?
Quite clearly,
yeah.
The transatlantic declaration.
So we're not asking the U.S. to do anything it has not already done?
No. Was it the new transatlantic agenda, I should say?
Again, I think that's a critical point to make, is we're not asking, if we're coming up with policy recommendations, we're not asking the U.S. to do something that's not already done. No. Okay, I'm looking at time, and I do want to give the audience a chance to jump in. So why don't I go ahead and stop here for a minute and see if any of you have questions you would like to pose to our three. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe it reflects on something I said earlier today, but I do worry about overcorrection. I think everything that's been said here about cultural sensitivity obviously is right on. We've seen that we've made too many errors. We've seen the costs that we've had, the price that we've paid for those errors. But I don't think we should entirely give up on the idea that there are universals. There are universals, human dignity, human expression, the rule of law, and there are others too, which we have every right, an obligation to stand up for. Perhaps where we've gone wrong is we haven't found the idiom in which to express these very often in ways that can be absorbed by the societies we're talking about. But you know, we've made a great deal of honor, and there's no question that honor in its various guises here, various codes and so on, that is critical. But we just have to look at our reaction to 9/11 to see what honor can do and how a whole society can respond, essentially because the United States was subjected to this. Our honor was at stake. You know, we played originally when the idea of Thucydides was brought up here. Somehow we did forget about fear and interest. And as political scientists here, we can't do that. I think what we've recognized that fear perhaps is not all that different than honor in certain respects. We react in a very human reaction. Fear will bring out things that we never thought ourselves capable of, and that's true for any public. So anyway, what I just want to say that as we look at these institutional variables, we have to see how they're mediated as well by the institutions of the society. So it may very well be they're much more malleable where the right institutions and the right leadership there, because so much of this is an educational process too. In short, let's not overcorrect.
I think you raise a good point. One of the things that came out of our conference last year is why should the transatlantic relationship survive in the rise of China and India and Brazil and other countries? One of our conclusions really hit on what you said, and that is one of the things that the transatlantic matrix, I'm looking at Ursula because she played a key role in it, one of the things that the transatlantic matrix can continue to do, and why I think it is still vital for some degree of world leadership, are the universal values. Some of the values of some of the other emerging countries do not have the same level of respect for individuals and freedom, and so I do agree with you that we have to maintain our priority on those values. It's how we accomplish them, I think, has been our problem. Yeah.
As well, if we it just went to sometimes say, well, they're not capable of this, can be demeaning. It could, what it means in effect is you just have not reached that level of civilization where you're capable of enjoying what we enjoy. So we've got to be careful here that we don't create that kind of.
Yeah, I don't think the problem has been our goals or our values. It's our means of trying to accomplish them.
Absolutely.
No, I think it's a danger, you know, to go from one extreme to the other. And I think as life in general, it's always a matter of balance. And I agree. And it's not that I preach, and this is for me a very personal question because I lived most of my adult life not in my native country, and different cultures, and America is also pretty different from Europe. So where do you draw the line? I mean, to stand up for your own values. That's also, I mean, you have to say that's my value, but not imposing our mentality or our way of thinking to other people. And where do you draw the line? I understand, you know, when it comes to, let's say, very brutal acts by the Taliban, do you think if you feel like a human being, you want to interfere, but is it another way of colonialism? We had this discussion all the time. This is right to my heart. It's as I said, it's a balance, and it has to be, I think, decided every time. And I also understand we can be very noble and say we don't impose our values, but other countries go ahead. And I was wondering that the role of Saudi Arabia plays in proselytizing, I would say, didn't come up at this conference, because they are not so noble and not imposing their values, especially, I mean, not only in the Middle East, but also Africa is very dear to me, so I know what they did. I know it's a question. I think it's not the perfect answer. As I said, it's all about balance, and where do you draw the line? It has to be answered, I think, in each case. Yeah, it's never black and white. That makes life interesting.
Mike, do you want to comment?
No, thanks.
Okay. Roy, I'll get to you now, but your hand had gone up.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, when I was thinking about the whole conference in the holistic view, I would say that it is important to take a step back, even before we define honor and dignity and values, which are all very important aspects. It's on. Is it working? And I had this side conversation with Dr. Ryan here during lunchtime, and I was telling him that I felt, after listening to the panelists, and you know, the Phenomics panel actually added to my thought process, that we need to, as U.S. society needs to, or U.S. government, U.S. politicians, leaders need to take a step back and figure out why they want to have particular friendships with particular nations. Hello. Because I think that whenever we are talking about, hey, we should invest in education in this country, or we should help them build free market economy, or help them have better governance. What is the purpose of doing that? Because it is definitely not coming from pure benevolence from the part of the U.S. to invest in any of these issues. And yesterday it was raised that, yes, in Egypt after the Arab Spring, people, especially women, need some kind of support from the media, from the Western media, from the Western government. The lady who was here, she said that she would like to see more involvement from the U.S. in the part of education, in the part of leadership building. But why would the U.S. do that? And the answer is, going back to Karl Marx, I would say it all boils down to the economy. I mean, U.S. is not going to invest in any way, any type of its resources, if it doesn't find something that it wants back. This is not a one-way process. It is a transactional relationship with the Middle East or any other nation in the world. So based on that, we are not clear what the U.S. wants from each of these countries or nations. And then, while the diplomats are very educated, very, very highly informed people who are working on the ground, but they're working on the premise that we are very sure what our purpose is over there. But if you look at the picture, take a step back, no, we are not clear. We don't know what we want. And if we don't know that, we cannot have friendships that are meaningful. If we can define that, yes, every friendship, at the bottom of it, we need something from you. Either it's going to be a direct transaction in terms of money or an indirect transaction, which also converts to money in some way. Only then we can move forward.
I think we do know what we want. We want access to energy resources, and we need stability to do that. And this is not a matter of friendship. This is a utilitarian relationship, and I have no problem admitting that.
But one of the speakers yesterday said, even if they run out of oil, we'll still waiting for that. So there's something beyond oil that provokes U.S. interest in the region. So,
Okay.
He's done.
Okay. No, but I also want to say,
I would submit our involvement will be on a far smaller scale if there's no energy resources in the region.
No, but I think it's nothing has only one reason to do something, and definitely it's an interest. And I'm very glad that you were so open, because I sometimes get a little bit angry when I hear, but this only the Russian interests, and I turn to your American colleagues and say, so America has no interest, I mean, it's the missionary zeal, but it's also you would leave a vacuum. And also now I have to play a little bit the idealistic role. People in the region and also in other parts of the world still look for some, I would say, possibilities or alternatives to live their life, and it's still, as much as America might be despised, it's still the spark of freedom has some appeal, I would say. And we shouldn't be I like normally to play the devil's advocate and be very cynical. It maybe comes after so many years as diplomats. But don't underestimate these two. And I think the lady who talked yesterday, and especially also the women there or the middle class, they look for some, not direct interference, but just, to some indirect help. And I think this is where the West in general, not only America, but also the European Union, could give them, give them the opportunity, give them the chance to know how it is, and then let them make more or less the choice. But if they don't know the alternative, the vacuum will be filled. And I'm sure that some other people with less, and they have their interests as well. Yeah.
Obviously, but why would the U.S. invest in Egypt? There has to be a clear reason why they're doing it. It is
because it would
politics
be
and economics. I mean, there is.
But it's geopolitics too. I mean, you don't want to get the whole region against, China is just waiting. And I don't have this anti-Chinese reflex as many Americans have here. We do very well, Germany and China is doing on very good terms. So I don't think that they are the next evil. We always need someone, it's a very manichaean perception, the good and the bad guys, no. But I'm not sure that we want to be under one Chinese superpower. I also think in check and balance, that's the old European model. Sorry, I like to teach, so stop me. And so I think we don't want to leave, or America or the West doesn't want to leave a vacuum in this area, besides the oil and everything. Yeah. I think it's never, sorry.
No, that's okay. I do want to get to your question. Do you have a response? No. Okay, go ahead.
No, I don't.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Well, I follow rules, But you covered this and you touched on it. But I think it needs to be underlined. As one of the excellent outcomes of an otherwise very depressing economics panel, which I think you discovered every barrier that I was trying to think of categories which were left that were okay. Is that one of the obvious big things in the Arab Spring was the need for jobs, and that was part of dignity. Now, one of the things that we should define our interests, but regardless of what our interests are, if we want to engage, we should do the things that we are good at doing and not the things that we aren't good at doing. We're not very good at regime change. We're not really good we're real good at massive military power and not so good, when you dial back. But we are very good at business. And we're good at with all our flaws, I think we're very good at business. Businessmen have a very clear eye that's a universal values, and I'm not being idealistic here. I think it's just a practical thing. So corporate governance, measurable things that both sides want. Businessmen want places to invest money where they're going to make money, so they can declare their interest immediately. And everybody understands that, and you don't even have to be cynical about it. I'm your friend because I want to make money, but I don't mind if you make money too, as long as I make more money, But no, I'm kidding. Only half. But good governance and having measurable things about things that one of the things was mentioned in the economic panel, and it was a big thing with the Millennium Challenge Corporation, was measures of how long it takes to get a business started in a country, and there are ways to get around that, and there are experts in Europe and the United States that can help with this because they've done it themselves. They've made all the mistakes already because they're just a little farther along, and they know how to at least to look for things and to fix it. And these are things that businessmen and women are going to react well to. So I think one of the big initiatives has to be inclusion in the world process of trade, which means they have to get things up to standard, and then they'll get more investment. And that's something we ought to invest a lot more time on. And that should go on, and I would make this a strong recommendation, regardless of political circumstances, because politics go up and down. Nations do well. You're doing very well with Germany and China now this year, but 5 years from now it may be very bad. But the fact of the matter is that this kind of business, if we're going to encourage people to be in the international system, is always a value, and it can always go on, or we can try to make it go on regardless of relations.
Okay, panelists?
No, there's no comment to this. I think that's absolutely true. And when you have to lose something, you think twice, When you are intertwined, it's hard to disengage.
Because we have this mutual interest,
right.
And we don't want it to break the game, because it's good for both of us.
If you have something, this was, I'm sorry that I come back, I'm of course a European historian. One of our chancellors in the 1800s, how he kind of countered the socialist movement by introducing health care and pension funds, and so he undermined actually the socialist and communist movement because he
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
it was Bismarck. No, but he said a worker who has a pension to lose, he won't be a revolutionary. And it comes down to this,
Yeah. We probably have time for one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to bring up one point. It's been covered a little bit here, but I think that you're going to see a very dramatic change in power of money in lobbying in affecting American foreign policy in the future. We've known for years that there are certain lobbying groups that have had influence, good or bad, APAC, anti-Castro, Cubans. If you'll recall, a few years ago, the Armenian group was able to get passed through the House a bill on the Armenian genocide right at a time when we were in very important negotiations with Turkey, and the Turkish ambassador left. I think you're going to see a growing influence of groups that represent one issue and one ideas simply because of the super PACs and the ability of money to essentially influence these decisions. And I'd like to know what our panel thinks of that, good or bad, period.
No, I don't have, I talk enough.
It's purely personal. I'm appalled at the decision that free speech equals money. I think, we limit speech in a number of ways. You can't walk around an airplane saying bomb, bomb, bomb. To me, you shouldn't be able to walk into Congress and buy a congressman. I think it's bad for American foreign policy. I think it's bad for American domestic politics. And it makes me sick that the Supreme Court has come out with that decision. So if you want to know how I really feel, we'll talk later.
No, I think this is really one of the negative sides of the capitalist system, right? I mean, not that authoritarian regimes have means to impose their interests, but that's a real problem, and this is overshadowing, I think, the whole American policy, not only the foreign policy. That you can, who has the money can buy the. I mean, where we talk about corruption, right? In other countries, so is in a certain way it's too here. Now it's a danger.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry. I think in 50 years, when this decision gets overturned, it'll get overturned on the same grounds that we limit speech all the time. When speech is dangerous to society, we limit it, and this is incredibly dangerous to democracy, I think. Now I'm done.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are you sure?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I'm trying.
Okay. I don't think the role of money, it's hard to say if the role of money is going to be accelerating in American politics, because it's hard to see it accelerating from the level it has at this moment. Oddly enough, where there are more lobbying organizations is not in Washington, D.C., but in Brussels. Mm-hmm. They've exposed themselves to a lot of influence as well. The role of money is going to stay. It's going to grow because of the Supreme Court's decision. There's nothing at this point that we can do unless we have a reversal of that. It's sad. Okay. Oh, and the Supreme Court, of course, almost walked out when President Obama made his point on that, if you recall.
Okay. Do our panelists have any other final comments? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Okay, well, thank all of you for your attention and your participation and sticking through till about 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. So I hope you have enjoyed and gotten a lot out of this conference.